We'll open up with a bit of housekeeping, I guess, just before we get down to business and start talking about Gooeys. So we're going to be moving our AMAs back a little bit to account for the fact that we now have more Europeans than any other nation on staff. So we're going to be moving back to about 6 p.m. UTC, which will be about 4 hours before, well, this current time. So if you're not able to make it into AMAs at that time, we will be having them up on YouTube, Twitch, etc., on recaps. We're going to be a lot better at getting them up a lot quicker in knowing that we're getting a decent bit more of a crowd in now, and we don't like the fact that people have missed a couple of them because we have been late in getting some of the AMA videos up. So we've streamlined that process a little bit, and it'll be much easier to catch them at any time you want going forward. Moving on from that then, Caroline joined us this week. Caroline joined on as the marketing director and I suppose overall business manager, taking over a lot of the duties that were keeping me away from the coding. Caroline, do you want to step up and say a couple of words, or do you not like being put on the spot?
Metaphorically, or no, figuratively step up. I do actually feel like I'm on a stage. This is this is cool. So I joined the team there last week as managing director. I guess my first experience of Dogira was in April 2021 when I heard Owen basically talking about it shortly after he joined the team, and kind of how he was excited about getting into the DeFi gaming space. And then I got my hands on some Dogira shortly after that. I was asked to kind of come on board and provide, I suppose, some strategic decoration. That's not it. Strategic direction. Definitely that one. And establish, some key marketing protocols and procedures across Dogira as a business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of me.
Caroline's coming on board and bringing with her about a decade of experience in marketing business, and this is going from small startup level companies all the way up to the more enterprise level companies. So far in the week that she's been on, you can likely already see that our social media traffic has been picking up a decent bit. We have a lot more time and resources that we're able to put towards our Twitter and other areas that we're running. So thank you for a fantastic start, Caroline, and we look forward to working with you over the hopefully very successful future that we've got ahead of us with one of our first titles coming up for launch in just over, what are we at, about 6 weeks, 7 weeks now, we're off on the release date. So Gooeys is our first play to earn title, long awaited. And this is where we're going to be giving you the rundown of everything that we've done with it to date. We're going to be talking about the actual game loop on it. We're going to be talking about how the minting is going to work, everything. If you have any questions while I'm speaking on it, just drop them into the AMA questions channel. So the first thing to jump forward with then is, I suppose, the actual launch that's going to be, I suppose, starting on the 25th of March. So this is what we're going to, the public mint is starting on the 25th of March. The overall strategy that we have is actually starting on the 25th of February. So on the 25th of February.
Just to interrupt quickly, the date is not actually the 25th of February. It will in fact be March the 11th.
The Dogira team and also the Dogira community team will be eligible to mint one NFT each. The Dogira community team is a collection of volunteers who have been working on, I suppose, getting the word out about Dogira for, well, from either months to over a year now that they've been with the community, reaching out to people on Twitter, reaching out to people on Discord channels, doing everything that they can to help people learn about Dogira and learn about all the positive things that we're doing from a development standpoint. And God knows, over the last year, I suppose, with the direction changes that we took and, I mean, moving across over onto the Polygon network and really rebuilding the coin from the ground up after we saw that, obviously, there was a lot of speculation around all tokens in around, March and April of last year. And from that time when, we had a lot of people join into the community, and obviously the market kind of crashed out from under everybody at that point, which led to, I suppose, a lot of people not really sticking around in crypto at all, let alone sticking around in a token that at the time really didn't have the amount of direction that we would have liked it to have. So given that full year now that we've spent working on getting, staking farms up and running, we've gotten our full white paper released. We've, been working in the background on a lot of our own proof of concept work, of which we're now able to, proudly say is going into a play to earn title. We've also onboarded an additional development team who are working more, I suppose, in the classic game development sense. And, building blockchain in as something that is going to complement it rather than the play to earn style that we're going forward with in Gooeys. But the community team that we've had on board have really always been there for the entire year. And I think that if anybody deserves to come on and mint one of the first NFTs, it would certainly be themselves. And on top of that, of course, given the amount of work that they've done, we're expecting them to pay for those mints. The team will be covering those as a thank you to the community team. So from myself and from everybody on the stage here, thank you so much to everybody who really, with absolutely nothing to kind of gain from it apart from their own general position in Dogira, the amount of time, effort and care that you've put into reaching out and speaking to people about something that you have a genuine interest in. It has been, it's been humbling really for myself and all of the team. And we're really looking forward to being able to show you what we've been working on in the background and bring you on board as, I suppose, the first players of our first play to earn title. So from there then, on the 25th, after that is completed, we will be looking at the actual Dogira holders themselves then. So number one, we have a verified holder section on our Discord. You don't have to rush in and start doing it now, but by the 14th of March, I would recommend if anybody's interested in getting into one of the early whitelist spots, make sure that you're verified on Discord as being one of our verified holders. We'll also be looking at general wallets that are within the top 100. The issue is it's very difficult to get in touch with a lot of the wallets that are within our top 100. So if we have no way to get in contact with you, we may do a blanket sweep over wallets and just, whitelist them at random. But given that we're expecting there to be hopefully a decent bit of demand for getting onto the whitelist, it will be much easier if we're able to just straight out speak to you and tell you that you are whitelisted and you can go ahead. So that's our verified holders section. We have, let me just grab the name of the channel. The Collabland Join channel. If you jump into that, you can verify your wallet. You do not need to give it any permissions. You do not need to give it any access to, say, send ether or anything like that. It just simply reads your wallet and it reads the amount of Dogira tokens you have in it. You just put a signature on it to verify that you own the wallet. And that's that. You'll be on our verified holders list, and that is kept completely private. Nobody else will know apart from the people that are obviously in the channel with you. But if you would prefer, you can leave that on invisible, or you could even remove the role from yourself on Discord. So after the 14th of March, we'll be looking at the 17th of March for our next whitelisting phase. We are looking at other projects, particularly in the play to earn space and in the general, I suppose, GameFi spaces that we'll be able to reach out to on Polygon and see if there's anything that we want to do in extending a couple of whitelisting spots on that. We'll also be looking at a couple of other packs that may be across other networks. They will all be EVM compatible networks. So for example, that might be Ethereum itself, it might be on the Binance Smart Chain, etc. We're going to be looking for, I suppose, people who have a vested interest in the play to earn space and in the general GameFi spaces to be able to offer them one of the early chances to get minting on our new play to earn title. So once that is completed, then we're going to be looking at essentially, we're going to be looking at the amount of spaces that are left over, and we're going to be splitting that both into the Dogira minting and for a public mint. On the Dogira minting, we will basically define where there's a cutoff, as in what number of wallets are we going to run down through on the list from number 1 all the way down to N, and how many whitelists we want to hand out on that one. Once we complete that, then it will likely be about a 50-50 mix, with the remaining going into a public mint on the 25th of March. So on the 25th of March, anybody can jump in and mint. Now, one of the most important things on this, we are going with quite a limited supply, and we'll be explaining that as we get into the actual game loop of it. But with this limited supply, I would recommend anybody that's currently in here do get into our verified holders channel, as that is where we're going to be giving a priority to once we have obviously the community team onboarded fully. So 25th of March will be the public mint, but we're unsure on how much there will be left at that point. And given some projects on Ethereum, it is possible that it will mint out as quick as we open it. So on the 28th of March, we'll then be doing our art reveal. So as you've seen with the Hanzo NFT launch that we did, we used Chainlink VRF to assign a provably fair distribution of randomly generated NFTs. The NFTs that we're going to be launching will once again have random cosmetics on them, but they will also have random statistics on them on top of that. So each Gooey is going to have a base and a max stat. So this goes across your health points, attack, defense, and speed. You will be able to level up from your base up to your max, and you will also be able to add on additional to that with certain accessories or weapons that are added into it. Once you decide to make a new Gooey, which is going to be having two Gooeys, which could either be two that belong to you or one that belongs to you alongside renting, leasing or loaning one off another player, which will be built into the actual smart contract itself, allowing for safe loaners of any Gooeys out to any of your friends or anybody that you would find out in the open that's looking for one. And once you do get your hands on two of them, you'll be able to breed or mate them and create a new Gooey from that. And similarly, this will run down with Chainlink VRF, and it will be, again, provably random, but also based off the stats of the two Gooeys that you have. The ideal game loop from this is, in order to grow your Gooeys, you have to continue mating them down successive generations until you are able to increase both their base and their maximum stats up to what we're putting right now at a hard cap of about 1,000 for each stat. You're able to feed them with food that you'll be able to pick up on quests with your Gooey. These quests will be done in, I suppose typically we'd call it the Fallout Shelter style of questing. You're able to send your Gooey out into the world, and you're able to leave your Gooey wander and go on that quest until you opt to bring him, her, or it back to you. When it comes back, it will have, a feast of either tokens, it may have food, it may have weapons, and it may have other goodies on top of that. Once they come back, you'll be able to look through all of this. You'll either be able to trade the actual items that come back with it, which again will either be food, weapons, other goodies, etc., or you'll be able to use them directly on your Gooey. So as an example, there are various different types of food you'll be able to pick up out in the world, and this ranges from everything from an apple to the devil's pomegranate. They all have effects on their food store, and then they have additional effects where they can level up your health, speed, attack, or defense. On top of that, there's also a bonding rate that comes with that. So every Gooey that you have will become bonded to you over time. And while this is mostly simply an over time thing, you can also increase that by feeding them foods that they particularly like. And if you're looking at some of the rarer food, such as the aforementioned devil's pomegranate, you will look at a much higher bonding bonus coming in from that too. When your Gooey is well bonded with you, there is a general overall increase in their stats, and there is also a higher roll that you get when you're actually going into the meeting or into the mating or into the breeding scenarios with your Gooeys. So if you have two Gooeys and they're both well bonded with you, you have them both leveled up well, you have them well fed, and you have, any other stats that you've raised on them through various different means, then it means that the offspring will again be a lot stronger for it. Every Gooey will have, I suppose, what we call lovingly a breeding fatigue. And this in short means that you cannot, unfortunately, just have one Gooey that you're going to mate for life unless you want to really face an exponentially increasing cost on top of that. So each Gooey will have fatigue following any time that they produce an offspring, and that fatigue will grow over time, eventually getting to the point of where it will no longer be efficient to continue breeding from the same Gooey. And that is a point where, you can send them to the Gooey farm, lovingly, which is the open market, not a euphemism for, a slaughterhouse. Or you can simply continue having them in your own team, where you could send them out questing, or you could simply retire them to enjoy their new life at home in your Gooey palace, Gooey kingdom, etc. So one of the main things then with the actual food system, of course, is that there is a hunger uptick system as well. These are creatures that you do actually have to care for. As I noted with bonding, if you're ignoring your gooey, then you're not going to have any bond with them. If you leave them go hungry, then your bond is likely to decrease. When you are feeding them, it gives them a food store which is based across polygon blocks, which will obviously break down in-game into a rough amount of seconds or minutes, hours, days or weeks, etc. So once you do have plenty of Gooeys up and running and you've produced plenty of offspring, it's completely up to you on whether you would like to continue questing and going on, longer quests or sending out multiple Gooeys on quests to bring back, say, a higher proportion of loot from it, or reduce their odds coming back with, what we call a defeated state, as in they weren't able to tackle the mobs that they would have encountered out in the wild and would need to rest afterwards. This allows you to bring back a lot more loot, and if your thing then is to jump onto, say, any open markets, it always goes very well to have additional Gooeys or able to pick up the slack on it. So with your own Gooeys as well, outside of being able to send them off on quests, as we said, you're able to loan them out, and you're able to do this straight through the smart contract. So there won't be any additional system that's built on top of it. You're able to loan a Gooey out for a certain amount of days or for any certain purposes, i.e. only questing, or for, purposes of stating that, you're looking for, or somebody's looking to produce an offspring from this Gooey. So at that point then you can look at, what are you actually looking for on your own end from this? That you may not be willing to suffer the actual, breeding fatigue as we talked about when it comes to the Gooey itself. So with that, you're able to selectively choose what you want your Gooey to be used for and put any charge on that you see fit. And this will all be done through the general NFTs and the smart contracts that we are running with this. So that could be, say, certain tokens that you're looking for, or a certain item that you're looking for, or any other trades. This will all be made safe within the actual game itself. So that gives you a general overall look at the game cycle that we're running with. On top of that as well, we're obviously going to be continuing to develop on this over time. While our first release is coming out with all of the aforementioned features up on April the 1st, we are going to be continuing to add on to this. And this is something that, of course, we are excited to work with the community on. So one important thing that I'm sure has likely been dropped in the AMA questions already is, what is, Dogira going to do outside of, helping you get a whitelist space or anything like that? So Dogira will not be the main token that we're running with in this game, as we need to use an inflatable supply when we're actually running with quests and things like that, as there is a very real possibility that we may run out of Dogira. However, with your Dogira, you will be able to stake that and earn the token that we will be putting into the actual Gooeys loop itself. On top of that, there may be additional cosmetics that we choose to only allow be available through Dogira, and there may also be certain buffs that you can get with Dogira as well. And of course, you will be able to get into any one of our staking farms with just Dogira, be able to receive either that new token, as I mentioned previously, or you may also be able to receive a Gooey as well. We're going to be continuing to work with that and find how we can integrate Dogira as best as possible. But as we've noted already, Dogira is mostly going to be used for the actual, I suppose, the bridge between titles. That there will be uses within the game itself, but primarily we need to develop on a fresh ecosystem in order to get everything running the way we like it on this. So when you go on a quest, there is a possibility that you can find some of those tokens that we're speaking about out in the wild. It may also be possible on the rare occasion to find a minor amount of Dogira tokens on top of that. When you do pick up any of those tokens and you decide to use them for anything that's in-game, as in, getting a loan of another player's Gooey, or purchasing any certain NFTs, stuff like that, with the token itself, that token will have a large burn rate. So managing inflation is one of the most difficult things that we've seen in a lot of the play to earn games that we've seen released. And even on simple DEX or decentralized finance platforms, we find that inflation tends to really run away from the actual developers, and it can eventually lead, I suppose, into a negative feedback loop where there really is no way to get a decent pegging back on it as demand is lowering, which, and of course, leads to less people wanting to pick up that token, which then goes into that loop of it simply just getting dumped at that point. We want to make sure that we're not going to be minting any Dogira. We don't want, our main token to suffer from any inflationary effects or anything like that. That is a deflationary token. So when it comes to the actual Gooeys token itself, we will be making sure that there are a lot of things in use on here that we're able to use to feed back into the actual deflationary mechanism on it, and also be able to use that to stake out the Dogira holders. We're also looking at systems where we may be able to automatically sell, these new tokens into a pool and have that then pick up Dogira with the results from it. Now, these are systems that currently we're speaking about, and we have not made any, I suppose, final decision on as of yet. However, as with our Hanzo NFT set, we will be setting aside some Matic for a Dogira burning pool, and that will continue to be fed into from the royalties from any NFTs that go onto OpenSea or otherwise. Right now, we're looking at between 5% and 7.5% in sales tax, our royalty fees on any of the second-party sales that go through. The second-party sales are probably going to be one of the larger parts for this actual ecosystem. As I noted, we are not minting a very large amount of supply of this. We are capping the initial mint at 1,000 NFTs. Any Gooeys that are created after that have to be created by players, and there will be no source from Dogira to get those. And this is including the fact that there's going to be about 50 NFTs that we mint into the Dogira deployer wallet for certain giveaways, competitions, etc. So once 1,000 people are in and on board, every Gooey that's picked up from there has to be created by a player. And as I've noted, there is a breeding and mating fatigue. So once these are created, the demand should remain there that fresh Gooeys are a hot commodity, so to say. And that is our overall game loop that we are running with for our initial launch. It's obviously ambitious. We've looked at a lot of different titles that have been out there and looked at the issues that they have had, and a lot of them, quite frankly, came down to one of two things. Either number one was on production quality. Now, this isn't to state that the games aren't fun, but a lot of the earlier games that we would have seen coming out on Play to Earn would have suffered from, I suppose, a lower production quality in the sense that they were just looking for functionality. And I think a lot of games did that extremely well. They were able to kind of tap into that functionality, and they were able to prove that there is a market there, that this is something that people obviously have a massive amount of interest in. I mean, if you look at summertime, when I think Bitcoin was dropping down below 30,000, and that was around the time that Axie Infinity just shot off into the stratosphere, that there's obviously a massive demand for play to earn games in the current environment. And we want to make sure that we're doing it in the sense where we're not going to create an inflationary problem for Dogira itself, or create an overinflationary base token, which will lead to a negative feedback loop on launch or anything like that. On production quality, as you've seen from the artwork already, Mary has been working incredibly hard on the actual sprites and on the base artwork itself from it as well. And I think I won't find anybody that would argue with me in stating that the artwork looks absolutely fantastic. And from a developer standpoint, I'm really enjoying working with this at the moment, and I really can't wait to get this into people's hands so they can see really Mary's absolutely incredible artwork come to life. It's I think after the last year, this is one of the first times, as I'm sure a few of you have noticed, that I'm nearly caught for words. That just seeing the absolute sheer level of effort and dedication that's been put in across this, and to be able to really approach a line where we could state in the sand that our first release is on the way. It's incredibly exciting. And yeah, we can't wait to get it into your hands and also see, where we'll be taking the actual game world from there with everybody's input, assistance, support, and of course, playtime. So apologies if I've been a little bit more tongue-tied than usual. I think this is one of our bigger announcements to date. But we'll be absolutely delighted to pull in any questions that are available in the AMA channel. Elijah, I'm hoping that we've got plenty lined up.
Yes, we do. I'm going to kind of not work chronologically on this one because I want to go for Gooey specific questions first, and then we'll work through some of the other stuff.
Yep.
So I think the first one that is a good question is how long is the breeding fatigue expected to last?
So the breeding fatigue that we're working with right now increases each time the Gooey breeds. So right now we're looking at a base rate of it being between 7 and 10 days, and each time after that it will increase. So there are two different kind of methods we're approaching with it. One of them is that you'll be required to burn a very large amount of tokens in order to re-access that feature. And the second one then is that it is simply locked out. So right now we're looking at between 7 and 10 days, increasing for each time there is breeding after that. And we're aiming for kind of a soft cap of about 5 to 6 times that Gooeys can produce an offspring.
Perfect. Let's see. So with Gooeys, are we planning any sort of interoperability with other games at this?
At this point, no, we're not. Now, with our own titles, it is possible we'll be able to very easily add in that type of functionality. But with additional titles, we have not reached out to other partners on it yet. As right now, we're really just focusing on getting the actual game itself up, running and standing on its own 2 feet, rather than having to look at any interoperability beyond that.
Perfect. Do you keep the Gooeys? Well, yeah, actually, you just answered this. The question was, if you breed your Gooeys, do you get to keep the 2 Gooeys and then the offspring? It's a bit.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you're not like burning one and then getting a new one. That's not how that works. So.
Yeah. These will be brand new Gooeys.
Are we ready to announce what the minting price is going to be?
So right now we're looking at it being between about 100 and 150 Matic. We'll have a definite answer on that one over the next week or two.
Perfect. Okay. Let me see if there's any other game-based questions here. All right, let's get into some of the bigger picture stuff here. Are we going to be building our own SDK, or are we using a third-party SDK for the blockchain implementation?
So a lot of the stuff that we're building is bespoke, as in we're building it solely for our own use cases. I am not building it right now with the idea of this being a releasable SDK, as in something that we put up onto the asset store, as it is for internal use. Now, that is not for any reasons alongside, that we just don't want to share or anything like that, but it's not being built with public use quality in mind. That a lot of kind of internal developer tools are, again, mostly based around functionality and are not very user friendly. So yeah, a lot of it will be our own stuff. Now, there are certain plugins that, we're kind of looking at, but I can't really say if we're going to be implementing them directly. I suppose there's a couple of issues with a lot of the plugins that are out there at the moment, whereas the reality is all we really need to do is interface with web3.js. And considering that, we're going to be looking at this being, a browser playable game, we have web3.js pretty much readily available. And the Unity engine, which we're building it in, has very simple hooks that we can use to just go directly into that and use that as a messaging service. So yeah, there's a lot of the SDK stuff is very bespoke to our own project directly. So a lot of that would just kind of be, our own stuff.
Perfect. What do the quests look like for this game? Does it involve active gameplay, or is it a passive activity?
Yeah, so right now, in, I suppose, the first release of Gooeys, we're going to be looking at it being passive. So as I said, similar to Fallout Shelter, you would simply send your Gooey out. You might give them some kind of, initial instructions, as in, how far do they want to go? What kind of risk reward category would you be looking for on it? Stuff like that. And you would simply leave them go. You would come back and you would opt for if you want to call them back to you, or if you want to just leave them continue on for a while. So the first wave then will be passive. While we are looking at doing more active stuff on there, it's important to kind of keep in mind as well that with this all being done on chain, as in there's no individual backend hitting in it at the start, this is all going to have to be carefully managed to make sure that we don't have any type of, sunflower farm situation. We have to make sure that we have safety guards in place so we're able to throttle certain usages at certain times if needs be without having any negative impact or effect on the gameplay. And a lot of what can cause that is when you are simply hitting the chain way too often for things that ideally don't really need a lot of interaction. Now, we are looking at, additional updates coming out from that then where we'll be able to do more active stuff, maybe have that taken off chain and simply verified on chain. But for the first iteration, it will be passive questing.
Great. I think Skylar had a question from Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so person on Twitch is asking, you guys can hear me, correct? Just double
Yep.
checking. Awesome. So Faboshi is asking, would it be better to just remove the deflationary token, Dogira concepts, as they're proving not to be so effective for the token in the long run? Just suggestion, I'm happy not to have a deflationary token.
Yeah, so the reality is we haven't had any deflationary effects so far. I think we burned a couple of test tokens and that was it. So, like, the first deflation period that we're going to have is when we set up the actual burning pools. Like, we're not reflecting into a burn pool or anything like that right now. It's just a plain and simple token. It's our own use cases that actually cause the burning to happen. So the first one will be that Matic burning pool that I've noted, where you'll be able to stake in your Dogira and receive Matic, and that's based off a percentage of the Hanzo NFT sales. So we're going to definitely still get that up and running, and that should see, I suppose, the first section of burn that we'll ever really see on Dogira. If that was kind of going towards a Gooeys level on it, if we were to remove all the deflationary effects from it, the reality is it would be still incredibly difficult to have that set up in a sense where we'd actually be able to use it as an in-game token supply. Again, it would be really ideal if we could use one token for everything. That's just being blunt about it. It makes everybody's job a lot easier. The problem is then that we may be dealing with multiple ecosystems that are all relying off the same token. So I noticed that a question came in there while I was speaking. It was asking about there being a high barrier to entry in a lot of the play-to-earn games. The reality is that if we loaded in Dogira on that right now, then I would imagine that the barrier for entry would become incredibly high, incredibly fast, as we would have a deflationary play-to-earn token with additional utility outside of that, which, it may be positive for short-term price movements of speculation on the token itself. That's what you're after. But from a development standpoint, it would be a nightmare. We'd also have a very hard time in actually, I suppose, making sure that we always have an ample supply of tokens to actually have in game for quest rewards and things like that. The reality is, without being able to actually mint a token and manage inflation and deflation against that one, it's nearly impossible to be able to design a game in any type of remotely kind of safe environment. That Dogira is great in that, you can make any token deflationary if you wanted to. I mean, you can make Bitcoin deflationary by losing your wallet keys. But when it comes to the inflationary part, that can't be magicked into place. Like, we could do, a token relaunch to state, yeah, we're going to have inflationary Dogira now, but I don't think anybody would really be looking for that. That this is meant to be, like, Dogira is meant to be a token where you can have yourself kind of exposed to the actual in-game economies that we're building and the experiences that we're building, alongside having you a way to, I suppose, get into those actual games to begin with. But it's not meant to actually have wild fluctuations like we would see in actual DeFi gaming tokens, which is far more expected when you look at a lot of the titles that have come out over the last year or so. So I hope that kind of answers that question, Skylar.
Yeah, I would say it answered it. He's saying pretty much thank you for doing all the development that we have done. He appreciates being part of the community.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Next one. How did we come up with the name and concept of Gooeys?
The name is actually down to Skylar. So we were looking at myself and some other team members, and We were sitting around talking about kind of, I suppose, the older games we were playing and a couple of the NFTs were hitting out onto the markets and, where are the influences coming from? And I started speaking about Ragnarok Online, which was one of the kind of earlier games that I would have played in, I think, my early teens. And I always liked the slimes in it. And we're kind of commenting on how, slimes are really a mainstay in a lot of RPGs. So Mary then took it upon herself to draw up what's essentially become the Gooey. And yeah, it was, I suppose it's kind of love at first sight in the team. It looked at Poros. That was it. Yeah. So she drew it up, and really that was kind of it then, that we were able to start kind of working on it immediately. It was one of those kind of eureka moments where we finally had something that we wanted to really jump into, that, we can build all of the complex systems that we want to build. We can make use of Mary's art talents in, if you have a look at even at the little trench coat GUI that we had up on the page, in the way that it was so easy to inject Mary's style into it, and then so easy to even inject humor into it. I mean, you can't look at them without kind of smiling or laughing. I think it was kind of obvious when we started seeing the sketches come true and speaking about the ideas that we kind of had for games coming up, that what's going to take the biscuit from it.
Yeah, it really did kind of feel like a lightning in the bottle kind of moment. And I think this is kind of a testament to just, teams sitting around and talking. I think a lot of the time, people put their head down and they work. They don't really talk to their coworkers. They don't really share ideas. And so, having that chance for us to just sit down and chat, like, it was a lightning in the bottle moment. Just it hit, and we were like, oh, that's a really great idea. And, Mary comes back with some fantastic art. Skylar pops off with Gooeys as the name. And it ran away.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. Like, I think it goes to say a lot that we never really got to sit down and actually really throw ideas at each other in so long, with all of the constant development that we've been doing. And then when eventually the day came that we could sit down and start chatting about things, everything was flowing so well. So yeah, it certainly stuck the landing really well.
Yeah.
I will also add my point that inspiration for Gooeys was really sudden. Like, it was based on long-haired owl. And I always loved masks. And when we spoke about slimes, I just thought that a simple slime is just a simple slime. And then people usually just put one slime from Ragnarok and change it a bit to use it in another game. And I thought that we can make something that is a slime but will be pretty unique. And it just happened.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you did a fantastic job on that one. Like, you could already see that there's personality in all of the Gooeys that we've seen so far. As we've got the blue one who looks either asleep or jaded. We've got the pink one who is just, affectionate
Loving
and wants all
everyone.
the attention. And then we have the green one who just looks happy to be part of this thing.
He's a Zen one. And they all have my own names, like a mascot.
Yeah, it's that's where the idea came from. We've just kind of been running with that one from there. I suppose the actual business side of it then, and the game design side of it, is coming down to a lot of spreadsheets. And that's unfortunately the case with just about everything that goes into actual game design. At the end of the day, you get a ton of spreadsheets and you start working at the math of how the game actually works. An awful way to ruin a game for yourself before you even get to play it, but part of part of the job, unfortunately. And Mary, you've had a question. Just jump in there. What are the Gooeys' names?
Oh, I will reveal it this time.
You got it.
All right. So this one is from Andrew E. This might be a bit of a longer answer or a more insightful answer. How has the game development process changed your understanding of how gaming and blockchain can work together? In particular, are there any new ideas that have come from getting your hands dirty with this game's development?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the learning came from looking really at other projects on it. Like, the reality is, when you're connecting onto something that's on chain, you might as well just be online. Like, it's an online game, except you're doing so in, obviously a much more open environment where everything is kind of provable and on chain. But the biggest part of it, as we saw kind of long before Gooeys even kind of came into conceptualization, was that games were having issues hitting load. And I think the Ronin bridge with Axie Infinity kind of demonstrated that, we have a developer who literally had to spin up their own chain just to kind of handle a roughly busy amount of data that's going through it. But the reality is that you should be able to run that type of game on any chain. So a lot of it kind of comes down to like imagining that you're developing with, an old 800 baud modem, that you have to be extremely careful of the resources that you're using on chain. On top of that, then, I suppose there's been a lot of work in seeing, what can we take off chain while keeping the security of being on chain. And there's a lot of, I suppose, difficult questions and difficult sacrifices that need to be made when we start going into looking at stuff that's going to be working in real time. Like, as we all saw with Sunflower Farms on Polygon, I mean, the entire network stopped, it halted, it practically crashed, went down to a crawl for several days. And the reality is that only stopped happening when there was an exploit that was hit on Sunflower Farms. I believe somebody was able to mint a bunch of NFTs and they were able to crash a market with it. Like, so what we were doing before that, and as I'm sure many of you were doing as well, we were looking at the actual price of gas versus the price of the tokens that they were generating via inflation. And we were trying to work out at what point does the gas cost more than the tokens so that the network traffic dies down a little bit. And that led to, I suppose, a lot of development decisions being put into this. Now, some of them are just simply, designing to not need to hit the chain constantly. Like, if you look at a staking farm, even the Dogira staking farm as it's been designed on our side, that shares a lot of logic with essentially an idle game. Like, when you look at how many tokens that you've earned from really any staking farm, it's simply calculating it in the background. Like, it knows how long that you're in the pool for, it knows how many, tokens in total are staked in it, and it knows how many tokens that it emits on every block. It doesn't do the math on the contract itself. You're just picking up those numbers, and it's just JavaScript that's working out, how much you're owed from the actual staking farm itself. Like, all of that logic runs in the background, and it's only executed when you harvest it or when you withdraw your tokens. There's a lot of stuff like that which I think really falls right at home on blockchain right now. Like, Sunflower Farms nearly had that kind of setup going for it, that it did a lot of stuff in the background, but the issue was that it rewarded the actual tokens immediately on click. As in, the minute that you saved your game, you could get tokens straight away from that one. You were able to do so much, like send so much through onto the smart contract. And I mean, this was coming straight down to, which flower pot you were actually taking, stuff like that. The amount of data that was going through on each call was absolutely through the roof. So that's a lot of stuff that we have to kind of look at when we're developing our own things, seeing, what's actually important to have on chain. I mean, the reality is with Sunflower Farms, if, I were to develop that from scratch, stuff like, what position you put your, plants in and stuff like that, I wouldn't store it on chain. I would probably store that on like the local browser. And if you opened it up on a new browser or anything like that, I would probably just lazy load everything. So yeah, things might get mixed up, but the reality is that's a lot of data to store on chain. And again, it's funny kind of talking about what a lot of data is. We're talking, a couple of bytes or a couple of kilobytes, and it's essentially a lot of data when it comes on chain. So we need to kind of keep those transactions down to a minimum without impacting on the actual game experience itself. They're also, as kind of I found from looking at Sunflower Farms and how it got just so out of hand, there also needs to be fail-safes in there. The reality is, if you're crashing the entire network, it's, there's one thing kind of catastrophic success, but it's another thing if your catastrophic success takes down an entire chain. And I think right now for a lot of blockchain developers, we all have to kind of take it upon ourselves in what's still a very early stage of, this level of GameFi and general DeFi and general blockchain logic. We need to be able to not pull the plug, but be able to throttle things down or batch a couple of commands or have a backend come in and take over a little bit. Like, there are a lot of solutions that can be taken to lower the massive amount of load that we tend to put on chain without actually sacrificing any of the gameplay or any of the vision that you're running with on it. See, I think that's kind of the biggest thing that I've had in jumping into it, that I'm really looking at how much I'm doing on a network and how much I can get rid of, which again is kind of like, it's a really wild contrast to say when we started, when we started kind of making early mobile games and stuff like that, data was no problem at all. We had 3G, we had, 4G, we had HSDPA in the middle of that. We never really worried about data. We might worry about storage. But when it came to, downloading stuff, like, getting a couple of JSON queries in, or, hammering your own network, we never really cared about it, particularly if we were getting static data or anything like that. What we did care about was, can the phone actually run it? Because phones, as I'm sure many of you remember, I mean, they weren't pushing out 3D graphics and, at the start. If you were getting anything that looked better than Cut the Rope, you were doing really well. Even Fruit Ninja gave one of my old phones some issues. So now it's kind of odd in that, I have the Unity engine and I can probably really go to town on, giving it I won't say giving it a good look. I'm actually going to say, doing justice to the artwork that Mary has been working on. And then when it comes to data, I have to be very careful in all of my development to make sure that, we are respecting the actual network limitations and are able to, have fallbacks if the game gets kind of, wildly popular or anything like that. We have to plan for all of those situations and get around them. So yeah, there's a lot in it. It's incredibly interesting. Like, I will give it that much. But I suppose a lot of it does kind of point me towards looking forward to where blockchain will be going in the future. Now, there will always be like room for developers to, I suppose, develop their software well. Like, you don't want to rely on hardware to do stuff that you should be doing with more efficient software. And I think that's kind of the phase that we're in right now with blockchain development, where developers have to recognize the limitations and work around them. But I am finding myself longing a bit for, in 5 or 6 years down the line, I think this conversation, if replayed, might sound alien. That, resources will be much easier to come by. It would be like, you've picked up a PlayStation 3 and you're talking about the limitations of a Super Nintendo. Like, they just don't apply anymore. So yeah, I'm logging to see kind of where we can go in the future with it. But right now, I think we're really just at the forefront of when, DeFi gaming is possible. So I think to be able to stand at this level and actually, start making games, like, it's really ground zero for everything that's going to happen in DeFi gaming. So I'm happy to be here and kind of experience this right now. I'm sure it'll give me a lot more appreciation for it in a couple of years' time. We won't have to worry about things like that. But yeah, it's interesting, to say the very least.
Yeah, I think kind of a quick roundup of all of that is that the Sunflower Farms contract made some very rudimentary mistakes based on kind of discussion I've seen about what happened with how they overloaded the chain. And I think that while we would not make those mistakes, it is very good for us to see how deep of an impact that made, so that we can really essentially future-proof our game.
Yeah,
so that's
no, absolutely. Like, I think it kind of served as a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of developers. Because, I mean, when I did a lot of the math on, what we can do going through the Polygon chain, and, we generally kind of eyeball between 50 and 70 transactions per second, maybe up to 100. And then you have to realize that that is shared across the entire network. If you have 100 people playing the game and it's calling, they're all calling 1 transaction per second that it works out at. And now the block time is 2 seconds, but just the simplicity of math, imagine that, 100 people are playing and they're all doing 1 transaction per second. That's crashed the network, or it's overloaded it. It's put Gooey up to like a high. People are going to have to front run you, and then you'll be front running them, and gas prices will start to go into a war. So there's really a lot to kind of consider and stuff like that. It's like, I think it really gave us a wake up call when we were able to see kind of how out of control it got. And the thing with Sunflower Farms is, I know, like, I've sat and I've talked about it a couple of times now, that, I've read through their source code, and the reality is, if you didn't know, like, if you weren't very accustomed to working on the blockchain, I could see how anybody could make that mistake. Like, they didn't know that it was going to get as popular as it did. They didn't foresee, the level of popularity that came into it. And they also didn't foresee the fact that there is a very gameable, well, I suppose, obviously it was a game, but They didn't see how gameable it was from a botting point of view. And we saw tens of thousands of wallets created that seemed to just be botting it constantly. It was basically an infinite money tree, which collapsed violently at the end of it. So yeah, I think everybody got a big wake-up call from that one, and we all kind of had to take a look at what we were doing and say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be aiming to use 50 transactions per second, because then we're using half the network, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary of all of that. I'm going to take this next question because it has to do with marketing. And Caroline, definitely feel free to jump in if you want to say anything after I start on this. With the addition of the new team member, can you speak on how marketing will evolve in the near future with the added experience /skills /time? How will we get people looking at the products? Now, for me, as I've said in previous AMAs, I have a very deep email marketing background. I'm very familiar with kind of Web 2 ads. So Web 2 ads being like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, a lot of the popular websites that are basically social media, but they're advertising platforms at the end of the day. So for me, having Caroline here basically gives me somebody else to bounce ideas off, which is how I thrive best in terms of coming up with new angles and new copy, new avenues for how to approach new people. And so one of the things that, and this is a bit of a trade secret, one of the ways that you find the right people for your products is you build a mailing list and you feed that to basically you feed it to Facebook, or in this case, let's say Facebook. You feed it to Facebook and it basically finds people who have Facebook accounts, uses that data, and then finds lookalikes. And so that brings in customers who are like your customers. And so having a mailing list for Gooeys in particular will help us find other people who will actually enjoy playing the game, at least in theory. And so we're really going to be working on Web 2 ads, because right now I think we have a lot of people in Web 3. There's a lot of people who would be interested in Web 3, but their only exposure to it is through word of mouth. And so if we can appeal to people who are on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, have never really had any sort of contact with Web 3, this would be a good way to bring them in. Yeah, but go ahead, Caroline, if you have anything you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much summarized it. I suppose to speak a little bit on my role, this year is obviously going to be a busy one for Dogira. We have a lot coming down the line, and I guess part of what I've been brought in to do is to analyze the inner workings and come up with solutions on how we can become more effective in our approach to marketing and business development. And, like before I even started, there's been strides towards planning campaigns in a much more proactive style, which is great to see. And I guess we hope to increase the amount of experiential marketing we do as well. I'm not sure if you mentioned that, Elijah, but just, hopefully we'll attend more in-person events where we can. Now, I'm based in Ireland, so I might have to leave Elijah and Skylar bridge a few of the US ones, unless we can get a few first-class business tickets over to the US. Happy to take them. But yeah, we'd hopefully increase our interaction significantly on our socials with these campaigns and the outreach. And I suppose we're doing some studies into, I guess, what other PTEs are doing as well in the current market. And I guess all this market research, I suppose it won't be immediately obvious, and it's going to take a few months, obviously, for the benefits and the dividends to, become, I suppose, noticeable from the outside. But yeah, hopefully all of these things will help us get new people to join the Dogira community.
Yeah, I think that's a great addition to kind of grabbing the other end of what we're doing. Lots of research, lots of infrastructure building, which Caroline is extremely good at. So I think we're all very happy to have Caroline here on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. Caroline came on about a week ago now, and just the amount of times that we were able to kind of sit down and hash out a bunch of ideas together and see kind of everything bouncing around the room has been fantastic. And I think really that was kind of an issue that we had beforehand, and that, we didn't really, we didn't have our products kind of getting ready to launch. So we couldn't really take the resources that we had, the very limited ones, and start pushing that into bringing on the amount of staff members that ideally we would like to have on board. So obviously now that we're running up on, our first major title launch, and that we have, the staking farm is already up and running, it's kind of come to a point now where there has to kind of be, I guess, a specialist that's in that department, and that's what Caroline came in to fill the role of. And yeah, it's been fantastic. It's great to see the team growing, and obviously it's great to have, a brilliant talent on board with us as well.
Yeah, definitely. I got one really good question here from Hex. He was the first person to ask a question today, so sorry we're getting to towards the end here. But do we have any plans to pursue some venture capital funding now that the games are being shown off?
Yeah, so we've talked about this a couple of times, and we've said before, we're going to wait until we're getting a little bit closer to seeing a game coming out. It's a kind of a difficult one to approach in that there are only certain groups that, we would be interested in working with. That we could, there are a lot of VC groups and angel funds, stuff like that we'd be able to look towards. Right now, we do have a decent amount that's still kind of in the piggy bank even. And we've been very selective with how we've actually spent that. We've started to ramp up a little bit now that we have, our products actually launching. So it's something that I can't really give a very definitive answer on. That we're always open to, speaking on any opportunities that come up. But the reality is that it would have to work both for us and have to work for the greater Dogira community. So it's not something that we would go rushing into. We wouldn't, start cutting development time to run out and start speaking with any VC that we can. But we have got, we have made some good connections within the industry and spoken with, I'm not saying this just from a straight, venture capitalist, we need funding kind of approach. I'm saying it from, the kind of incubation groups that we've been looking at and the developers that are kind of coming into this space, the groups that they have set up outside of just for, seeking funding and stuff like that have been like an incredible resource to be able to kind of leverage on. But I think the amount of work that we've done kind of in the background is we knuckled down and we got a lot done before we even kind of started speaking to anybody at all about this stuff. It's put us in a really good position where we're one of the few tokens that can kind of sit back a little bit and, not, a lot of tokens right now are looking at the market, as I'm sure a lot of people are as well. It's like we've had a couple of brutal weeks with Bitcoin and thankfully a bit of a bump up, but there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty right now when it actually comes to the overall market in general, and that's including stocks and precious metals, etc. And for a young startup token, now I'm not saying that we'd laugh it off, but we would be in a position where we'd be able to continue development. Like we don't need funding to bring us through to tomorrow, that kind of thing. We have something that's actually in the piggy bank and we're able to run forward with that. So when it comes again to external funding, we're in a very lucky position in that we're not in danger if we don't receive any. And a lot of other tokens, unfortunately, would not kind of have that same position. Like we have all the resources we need to continue building. We would just look at how, we'd be spending our marketing budget and stuff like that if we did find that the market was going into, a more prolonged cool off or anything like that. So yeah, it's kind of coming down to, do we want to give away a percentage of what we're working on? And if we do, what would both Dogira and its holders be able to benefit from that? So again, it's something that's always kind of open to discussion, but it's not something that ever we, go running into just for the sake of getting VC funding or anything like that. But yeah, there are certainly partners out there who we have an open line of dialogue with, and again, not to state that that is for VC funding or anything like that, but the general resources that can be provided by some of the bigger groups that are, jumping into cryptocurrency and crypto assets, DeFi and, GameFi at the moment. There's a lot more that can be had from it when, we're not in a situation right now where we need to kind of, worry about where a paycheck is coming from. So I think, yeah, certainly something that is always kind of open for discussion, but I'm quite happy right now if we were to continue working as we were.
I think a good potential last question. If you guys have any other questions, definitely get them in the AMA questions thread right now. Or if you have any questions from Twitch, make sure that you bring those to my attention or Skylar's attention. Are you comfortable sharing when the community will be able to see gameplay?
So right now I guess we are keeping a decent amount of it under wraps as we have. You will be seeing gameplay obviously before the release comes out on it. That's something that was wanting to keep it completely closed off, but I figure marketing would probably not be marketing would not appreciate me if I kept it locked down for that long. So there will be gameplay before we come up to, likely before the actual public art reveal, as it's likely going to even be before the public minting date. It will likely be short enough sections so that, I mean, everything that goes on to actual GameFi, so far we've seen that, there's never been gameplay footage released before, of an upcoming game for many titles, simply because, as I've stated, they go for functionality. And yes, granted, like, we're going to be releasing a version of it which would absolutely have stuff that we're going to be adding onto it over time. I mean, we're looking at various different systems you want to get added into it. But when you're looking at a purely functional game, you would typically not see screenshots or, anything like that, because it's a HTML page. So we're not going to be going down that route. It's not just going to be a HTML page with, a static asset or anything like that. We will be showing off a little bit of what it looks like before we actually come up to the launch date. Exact date on that's still TBA.
Yep, that's about what I anticipated. Let's see, is there anything else? Got one more that's definitely a good one. What is the backdrop or the setting of the game? Are we planning to have a plot or story mode?
Yeah, that's been something that the team has talked through on nearly every title that we were looking at in the past, that, we'd love to have a proper story in the games that we develop. It's a difficult one when it comes to being on-chain. Like, I suppose we can store dialogue on chain, but it wouldn't be much of a surprise to anybody, considering we'd literally be printing it on chain, unless we shoved it all up encrypted and then decrypted it in the browser, stuff like that, or unless we hooked it up to an actual backend. So the version of Gooeys that we're going to be launching with first will not have an actual storyline to follow through or anything. It will essentially just be kind of like your typical infinite loop and stuff like that. It is something that we will be looking at in a more longer term on it. And I think Mary did a pretty good job of kind of getting the general feel of the backdrop that we're going for in the actual promo art itself. So you're looking at that kind of nice fantasy world kind of feel to it, fantasy magic, stuff like that. Like, Mary, do you want to kind of expand on those kind of motifs? What kind of, particularly around the artistic design side of it, like what kind of has inspired you in the backdrop that's being set in this? As we all know, I'm just sitting here coding it. The beauty and the creation side of it is coming from your fingertips.
Oh, well, that's a good question, and that's a really good question where I need to think what I can say and what I shouldn't say. But I'd say that the world of Gooeys is in the artistic side, and in the side of what I'm thinking about is not just pure fantasy. It's based on something else, and I will reveal this soon with some doodles, concepts, and arts which will come with development progress.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And like, on that as well, I would love to see Gooeys get to a point of where we could, realistically start adding, an actual follow-through storyline onto it. I'm sure right now people are, more interested in getting the functionality running on there and having something fun to play with. But there's always room. Like, right now, again, this is kind of like, you don't want to say too much, but one big thing that we are all fans of in kind of any games that we've played as a collective group is kind of the background lore, in that, like, there's stuff to read and there's stuff to learn, stuff like that. Like, it doesn't have to be a direct linear storyline that you're following, but just knowing that there's, been creative thought and process, and, maybe a level of history even put into the stuff that we're looking at, and allowing you to actually dive into that and explore it a little bit. So that's kind of what I always have as my favorite style of story in any game. Like, if I'm playing, for example, Skyrim, and I'm, never following the main storyline, I don't think that's part of the game, but I will always love finding, like, unspoken storylines around the place. Like, somebody who has what was it? His name was, I think, something the Blind, and just the fact that he was sitting there reading a book with no letters in it. Just, I know that's one of the more kind of gag ones that's in there, but all little things like that where there are stories in it that are kind of natural and organic, which don't get shoved in your face. You have to kind of look for them to find them. And granted, yeah, quick gags are brilliant, but I mean, there are some actual deep storylines that you can find in these things as well. I mean, The Witcher was actually quite good for them too. Just stories that you can stumble upon, but they're not really your story. You're just kind of looking at the after effects of it and, working out what had happened at that time. So that's the type of particular story and lore that I would love to see more of going into any titles that we build. But yes, I do understand that linear stories that have, a start, middle, and end, yeah, there's obviously an appeal to them. Difficult to do on chain at the moment, but as I've said, this is something that we will be continually developing on. So there's always a possibility that there may be an update in the future that would address that kind of desire.
Yeah, and thankfully you've got a writer who also knows other writers on the team. So maybe
Exactly.
a lore library could be something in the future. Again, that's not a confirmed thing. Anybody, that's just a suggestion off the cuff right now.
Yeah, I'd really like some lore. That'd be awesome.
But we do have that fancy Gooeys.io site that we could put to use. So we'll definitely give you guys more of a peek into those future features that we bring to the table as we are able. In the meantime, it's just about getting the core product out at this point. Is there
Absolutely.
anything else anybody would like to add?
I do. I saw a question. Well, it's not just a question. It's like a statement about Farm Dogira. No, it's Gooeys are not connected to Dogira-chan Farmer Arts, but you can see the fairy there, and I can say that fairy there is the main mascot. Like Dogira is a mascot of obviously Dogira, and in Gooeys it's not Dogira.
Yeah, so the lady in the artwork does actually have a name, but we haven't released that one yet. We'll give some more details on that in the near future. But I just noticed that Elijah jumped in as well and noted the Gooeys.io website. Yeah, that went up about 15 minutes before the AMA. So feel free to have a look on that. You are also able to apply for whitelisting on that as well. So if you do want to throw your application in on that, then you are more than welcome to. So the website right now it's pretty basic. It's just getting, apply for your whitelist, but we're going to be having more details going on there in the near future. And obviously we'll get our link backs to Dogira and otherwise on there in the near future too.
Yeah, great. Well, if there's not any last minute questions, this has been the Gooeys AMA. Thank you so much for spending a solid hour with us, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And on behalf of myself and the rest of the team, we can't wait to get this into your hands. Be sure to follow the new page that we've got set up on Twitter for it and spread it anywhere you can. Get people into the Discord on here as well. We have got a Gooeys General set up now. So, get in there, start talking about what you'd like to see in the game itself, discuss the things that you'd like to see us actually implement into it, and obviously feel free to ask us questions. We may not be able to answer a lot of them, but we're more than happy to at least provide a listening ear to any concerns that you might have.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. We are now back on our every 2 week AMA schedule. So there'll be no AMA next week. There will be the one after that. So in the meantime, I also believe that the Medium article is going to be going live on Monday. So we wanted to give this whole thing time to breathe. And then the Medium will have some information about the game in there, along with some of the other updates that have happened over the past month. So thank you guys for being patient about waiting for that. It is written. It's just given the space. So, all right. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yep. Thanks, many and all. Speak soon.